The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Lighting Controls Podcast. We have another fantastic guest for you today, but before we jump into the conversation, let me take a minute to remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. Got a lot of information, all of our episodes, and information about the NAILD LSC. We just finished our first run of that. It was very well received. We're going to do a little bit of restructuring, but overall, we're looking forward to doing it again, and hopefully you will join us that time. But also, huge shout out to our sponsor for this episode, which we could not do this without, MW Connect. You can check them out at mwconnect.us. You may know them as McWong. They're no longer McWong. They've rebranded to MW Connect, but they're still the same excellent Bluetooth award-winning solution for lighting controls. They have everything from networked to triple LC and all the in-between. They love to help out with integration. So if you're looking for integration or interoperability support, they're ready to get involved in your next project. So check them out, mwconnect.us. But until then, let's get into the conversation. So today we have Chris. Chris, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm Chris Bocchiaro, and I'm currently sort of have two roles. I am the senior project manager for Lenny Schwendinger Light Projects, which is a lighting consultancy based out of New York, focusing on public-facing lighting projects. And I'm also the creative director for Clear Story Light, which is my own venture focusing on public art and iconic landmarks. And so I've dabbled in quite a lot of areas in the lighting industry over the years.
No, totally. And that's why we're really excited to have you on the show, because, I mean, you've kind of worn so many different hats. I mean, where did you start with your lighting career?
I started probably like a lot of folks that have come on here in the theater world. I got a degree in Boston in theatrical lighting. I don't know what really possessed me to do that. I hadn't really done any of it in high school, and somehow just decided that would be a great thing to study at the undergraduate level, and spent a lot of time in Boston doing, I would say, fringier and experimental and a little bit of sort of mid-sized theater. For a while, as well as some event work, and then wound up working for a lighting manufacturer for quite a few years. And that's really where I kind of got to know my way around the architectural lighting industry, first as an inside salesperson and then as a specification salesperson. I later went on to do...
if you don't mind pausing there for a second.
Yeah.
The terms inside sales, specification, outside sales, I feel like those are terms that we use a lot, and maybe not everybody understands what those are. So if you don't mind just defining those for us.
So inside sales, at least as a manufacturer level, and I think reps use these terms as well as manufacturers, it's really quite literally those who sit inside, who are in the office, as it were. A lot of them probably don't sit in an actual office anymore, but those who are primarily responsible for working on computers, for doing quotations, for setting up samples, for really being the person who picks up the phone when the phone rings. Whereas outside sales or specification sales, which was the sort of work that I was doing, calling on lighting designers and engineers and other folks who specify lights, they are a much more proactive role. They are setting up meetings and trying to insinuate themselves and their products into actual projects, which is quite a lot of fun. So I will say inside sales is a tremendous way to start a career in the lighting industry. If anyone's listening who's starting
out. And why would you say that is?
Because you get to meet pretty much everyone in a somewhat
Mm.
low stakes environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not you don't have some sort of sales quota. It's not the sort of typical like, oh, you have to sell X many things or your boss is going to yell at you or
Right.
whatever. You don't necessarily have to have a huge network of
Hmm.
people because people will find you because they're interested
Mm-hmm.
in the brand and they're going to call. But also because you really learn how a company works. So when
Right.
I had started out at the firm that I had worked for, which was Color Kinetics in at the time Burlington, Massachusetts, we had pretty much everything that it took to run a lighting company within that building. We had a finance department. We had a customer service department that was responsible for shipping orders. We had a supply chain management department that was responsible for sourcing materials and getting things manufactured, um, and getting things shipped on time. We
Yeah.
had marketing, product marketing, and then engineering of all
Mm.
sorts: optical, electrical, mechanical, um, firmware, software,
Mm-hmm.
the whole lot. And so, as an inside salesperson, you get to pretty much interact with all of those people and more, and learn not only how light fixtures get made, but how they relate to the market, what the input coming in from the market is, what do people actually need to go into designing a fixture, and then how do you actually get things out the door and make a profit.
No, I think that's a really excellent point because we actually see a great number of inside sales jobs being posted frequently
Yeah.
across the country. And I think a lot of people shy away from sales because they kind of view it as like the dark side of the industry because you're sales. But in reality, I mean, inside sales, you're really not the one banging on people's doors saying, "Hey, can you use my product?" You're just supporting the outside salespeople by essentially being the project manager in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great place to. Certainly, some people do it at various levels all throughout their careers, but certainly for
Yeah.
me, it was a great way to really start out in the lighting industry. And it's not something anyone's ever heard of. If you're just entering the industry, you might have an idea that, oh, it would be cool to be a designer, or it'd be cool to be, maybe a programmer. Yeah, no one ever says I want to be a salesperson when I grow up. So, but it's not
Yeah.
all
But
bad. It's not all bad.
it's a good way, though, like you said, not only is it a good way to learn the industry, but it's a really good way to also learn the products as well. And like you said, the people, and get to know everyone, because it is low stakes, right? Most of the time, people are calling you, they already have the part numbers they want. You don't have to, I don't want to say it's an entry level job by any means, because that's demeaning to the job, but you don't have to know every single piece and part of a system. A lot of times inside sales, people are calling you, I want this, I want that. They're giving you those part numbers, or they're giving you the description so you can easily find that information. So you don't have to have as much knowledge about the products and the system as you would as an outside spec sales, where you need to know everything about that light and how the systems connect and how everything works and goes together, so that you can convey that to the specifiers and the rest of the community designers that you're working with. So I think it's a good way to, like you said, it's a good way to get into the industry and know that you could go to just about any firm and you don't have to have all the knowledge in the world.
And to your point, the more experienced folks who have been in those roles, sometimes for many, many years, it's certainly not an entry level element,
No.
because those folks are often will have the entire price list pretty much memorized, and
Yes.
the most they'll have the part numbers memorized. And
Right.
certainly, I find as a lighting designer, and I suspect I had found as a salesperson calling on lighting designers, they don't really have a lot of time to
Yeah.
Yeah.
beat a bush. They don't really care about golfing, at least most of the ones I worked with, or any of that. They just want to talk to the most knowledgeable person and get the answers as quickly as possible so
Yep.
that they can move on and do their creative work. So
Yep.
that speaks to. to what they can bring
Yeah,
to the table.
you're definitely my kind of sales guy, because I'm not the one to be in the golf shoes playing golf. I'm the one like drilling into the engineer's head, being like, "What is this? What is this?" But
Exactly.
at any rate, so that was sort of part of your career trajectory, and then you
Mhm.
transitioned out of sales.
I did. So after doing that for quite a few years, I worked in integration, and I found that really interesting because I had had certainly some knowledge of controls and control systems during my time in both inside and specification sales, and was often kind of found myself in the position to recommend entire control systems to folks who didn't necessarily know a lot about control systems. They knew exactly what they wanted out of a luminaire. They knew exactly where the luminaire should go, and they had an idea of how they wanted his luminaires to be used, in a dynamic sense, or even in just a dimming sense. But they were very reliant on someone to help move that along, and help put
Mhm.
together a control system. So I found myself doing that in sales, certainly with the support of controls engineers in some cases, and sometimes not. And so when I started doing integration with a smaller company out of New York called Nanometer, we were really focused on forging connections with lighting designers to say we can simplify this process for you. Um, and certainly then, as a person who's able to be in the field actually doing startups, doing integration, as well as sort of selling it, it becomes a very personal relationship
Mm.
between sort of designer and integrator slash programmer, whatever you want to call it, because there has to be a level of trust there.
And so, what did that like? From your standpoint, and how long ago are we talking? Out of curiosity, when you started doing integration.
I started doing it in about 2020 or so,
Okay,
2021.
so not that long ago. So
No.
working for not for a manufacturer, for another firm, what did
Mhm.
integration look like for you? Because we seem to have varying definitions across the industry of what integration truly means. So for your
Yes.
firm, what did integration truly mean for you?
So, and I will say this is very specific to dynamic lighting systems. So if that wasn't implicit so far in the conversation, this is
Thank you
this is sort of
for
my.
clarifying that. Yeah, you're not doing HVAC integration or anything
I'm
like
not doing
that.
HVAC integration. I've found myself in the niche world of dynamic lighting systems, and the somewhat unique control systems that operate them. So I, to this day, can speak very little to sort of traditional um, interior architectural lighting control systems, for example. That was never my shtick. It's to me, integration really does sort of take on a theatrical quality of uh, bringing multiple disciplines together, most of whom aren't very familiar with that type of system, because in most cases you have an architect or an architectural lighting designer who does not specify or design dynamic lighting systems on a daily basis. They do it
Yep.
sometimes, maybe for a junior designer, maybe it's their first time. It's not something they get to do every single day of the
Mhm.
week in most cases, and so they have varying degrees of comfort. And likewise, on the installation side of things, the electrical contractors often have not worked with a dynamic lighting system before, and so
Mhm.
the style of controls is very different. The requirements of the lights are very different. You can't necessarily just beef up the power uh, gauge in order to solve voltage drop issues that may be a part of the control system, not the electrical design. And so to me, I found myself being an intermediary more than anything else in trying to help the lighting designer not only to realize their vision, but in some cases helping them to develop that vision as it related to what sort of dynamic effects were even possible and could be done. And then to help put together a system and a package that was able to of hardware and software that was able to provide that, and then to make sure that everybody else along the chain, from the distributor and the rep and the installer, kind of understood what was going on and what the system needed to do. I know that this is discussed a lot on this podcast, and it's something that I've certainly found. It's different every time. There is no consistency. There is no person who's on every job, who's like the architect. I'm the architect and I design the building. I'm the HVAC engineer. I design the HVAC. There is no person who's always, I'm the controls system designer integrator. Sometimes there is, but sometimes they're brought in at the beginning and sometimes they're brought in way too late. Or sometimes it's an agent, or sometimes it's a manufacturer. Sometimes the lighting designers themselves do it. Who knows?
Well, and I think that is part of the fascinating component of our industry, is the fact that when we're talking about lighting controls, we could be talking about a handful of people who are actually responsible for it. And so from your perspective, who would you say is the one responsible for designing the lighting controls?
So as many different ways as I've seen it, I think it can be effective in many of those different ways. I don't know that I have an answer for what is the ideal way. I think it really comes down to a combination of how experienced the lighting designer is and how much of it they want to be able to do themselves, and how much trust they can put in another individual to do it and where that individual sits. Sometimes it is the agent. Sometimes they have a very close relationship, and early on in the design process, you're budgeting something. You don't need to design the whole control systems out, but maybe you need to start putting a budget number on it, even though you don't know what it is. And that's something that a trusted agent can say, yeah, of course, we can carry an allowance for control system and all of that good stuff. And here's what it is. And if there's trust there, then the designer will say, sure, we'll make sure that gets into the project budget and we'll figure it out later. And that's not always a bad way of doing it, because it does not waste a lot of people's time early on.
Sure. Well, and it goes to the source. That's the other thing, is that if you're bouncing around from person to person going like, what's your number? What's your number? What's your number? Then, you could average it out and maybe get right, but you may as well just go straight to the source and say, okay, give me a number like that aligns with this project. And they'll probably have a much better guess than any of the people that you would have otherwise gone to. So I think having trusted advisors is still critical to the success of a lighting control system design. But at the end of the day, there's still that dialogue that needs to happen, where you have a designer and you have a rep, and they're not the same person, at least in my perspective.
No, they're certainly not. And in markets where there are less lighting designers, that may be a little different. I've primarily worked in markets that have lots of lighting designers there, and most projects have had one involved, but certainly that's not always the case across the country either. And sometimes the reps do have an outsized role in the actual specification, depending on their relationships. But in the world that I think we're most familiar, that does involve dedicated lighting designers, I think the other main guiding factor in terms of how controls get to function, get to be integrated into the equation, is the luminaires themselves, and how many different types, many different brands, to be
Right.
blunt, are going to be present. If you're specifying a facade that maybe only has a few types, and you're getting them all from one trusted manufacturer that can support a good product to do X, Y, and Z different applications across the building, and you need a control system that just controls that facade and is more or less separate from everything else in the building, a lot of times the manufacturers get involved, and that
Right.
makes sense. But once you start adding in a bunch of other brands, now all of a sudden that
Mhm.
manufacturer who may have been perfectly
Mm.
happy to provide the soup to nuts of controls and programming and everything is going to say, "Oh, I don't know anything about that. I'm not going to address somebody else's product."
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
No, and I think that that's a really good distinction there, because I think a
Yeah.
lot of people do ask the question, where do I draw the line at getting a third party integrator involved? And that is a
Yeah.
really good like starting point. How many brands do you have involved? Because if you have more than one, odds are you need a third party integrator. We're talking specifically about DMX right here. But, because most architectural US based projects are 0 to 10 or phase dimmed, which you don't necessarily need a third party integrator for. But when you start getting to DMX and you need to address fixtures, or Dolly, and you need to identify fixtures, you really are talking about programming capabilities, which most contractors are not capable of doing. And like you said, the brands are not going to touch other people's equipment. And so as a result, that service kind of stops at their fixtures and somebody else needs to pick it up. So I think that that's one of the really good lines to delineate between when your project needs an integrator or when you can just kind of use the manufacturer's in-house staff for the startup of the system. But anyway, so we've talked about where you were from, but where are you now?
So I'm working on. I'm gonna merge together two sort of different jobs and say that I'm
Sure.
working on public facing projects that
Hmm.
incorporate art and light into site specific applications and usually have some sort of community focus. So
Mm.
that's a lot to unpack. So I can I can break that
Yes,
out a little
let's definitely unpack that, because it sounds awesome. I love it, and I imagine that there's a number of people who are like, what are you talking about? I heard like every third word.
Exactly. So the projects that I enjoy working on, to sort of break it down, and that I've been lucky to work on, are ones in the public realm. So I'm able now to move away a little bit from corporate interiors and that sort of thing, and
Mhm.
really focus on bringing light into predominantly outdoor spaces that
Mhm.
have some element of public connection. So that could be a private urban structure, such as facades and crowns of buildings where I've spent a lot of my time previously. Um, and still do, because those are essentially canvases for light art in a way.
Mhm.
If you consider a dynamic facade or a dynamic crown as a series of pixels onto which
Mm.
you can
Yeah.
add color and add movement, there is a tremendous amount of artistry that goes beyond um, sort of an initial level of design of saying, yes, we need to get X number of foot candles onto this wall. Really, what do you do with it? How do you create movement? And how is that something that is connected with the people who see it? So that's really interesting, and that obviously
Mhm.
involves controls on many levels.
Right.
And I'm also working in rural settings, sort of the opposite, uh, doing light art for sort of illuminated trails that have
Mm.
Mm.
become, I would say, quite popular after the pandemic. And what
Yeah.
these sort of programs do is uh, usually allow some sort of museum or public garden or some sort of nonprofit that has a lot of outdoor programming to expand that programming either
Mm.
into the evening hours when they're not accustomed to being able to have programming, or into the winter months when they're not accustomed to having programming. Lighting really creates new opportunities to get people outdoors and to get people enjoying their environment, enjoying their nighttime um, their nighttime environment, and that's true in urban environments and in sort of rural and park-like environments. Um, so it's to some extent taking theatrical elements literally to the streets, and saying how can we
Mm-hmm.
very purposefully create these spaces for
Mm.
people to inhabit in a public setting.
So let's use New England as a frame of reference, just for the multiple seasons and trees losing their leaves and things such as that, which may not be the case in certain other areas of the country. Um, when you're coming in and doing some of these trails and things like that, are you doing them as temporary installations or permanent? And then if you are doing them as permanent, are you going in between like summer and winter to change anything because of how the landscape has changed?
So those projects I'm doing as temporary. It usually, because it's a programmatic
Hmm.
aspect, meaning this is somewhat of an event. People are going to go to it specifically to go to it. They're potentially going to buy tickets to go to it. There is an expectation that it's going to continually change. And I think the clients and the organizations that produce these recognize that even if they create a really cool environment, uh, if it's exactly the same year after year, um, because they're trying to get people there on a recurring basis to purchase tickets, they need to be able to alter it. So those projects have really brought in, in my case, I've wound up bringing in a lot of equipment that was really designed for permanent installations, because it's extraordinarily rugged and
Mm-hmm.
and able to
Yeah.
withstand the elements, and uh, modified it in such a way to turn it into something that can be temporary and easily set up and taken down and still run for, you know,
Well,
three
and
to
I think
four
that that's an
months.
interesting skill that a lot of people in our industry don't possess, is this sense of temporary installation rather than permanent installation, because
Mm.
we're so focused on, okay, is it going to get buried in concrete? Is it going to get installed in a gyp ceiling? Like, how does it get installed, that they don't think through, okay, what's the lifespan of this? And then when does it get removed and how does it get removed? And so, just curious if you'd let us kind of probe you a little bit on this to understand, like, what are the primary concerns when you're doing temporary versus permanent?
So some of them are the same, because if it's outdoors for any
Hmm.
longer than, a day, it's subject to the same
Right.
weather conditions that it would be whether it was installed for a month or a year. So that is always top of mind, is
Hmm.
ruggedness of construction and of installation, which are both, I think, pretty distinct. The ruggedness of the equipment is on
Right.
you to get the right equipment. The installation is more so on you to make sure you're not
Right.
installing it in such a way that it's going to get damaged by the elements. The other sort of concerns for temporary is, um, how do you connect things to their environment in a way that's sturdy enough that they're gonna stay put, without
Mm.
necessarily leaving any lasting
Mm.
impression. So
Right.
clamps, not through bolts, for example, where possible.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, fixtures are being ground mounted in those sort of landscape lighting environments.
Hmm.
Um, so there's a lot of sort of staking into soft ground, but there's also a lot of how do you elevate things off of grass so that you don't kill the grass if there's grass there or other plants. You
Hmm.
want to have sort of a light touch on the environment as much
Mhm.
as possible, in order to make sure that
Well,
you are temporary and that things can return back to the way they're supposed to
right.
be when you're gone.
No, and I think, because we're not talking like theatrical temporary where it comes in for like a couple weeks and then leaves. It sounds like it's a lot longer than that. Is that accurate?
Most of the projects that I've worked on have been around 2, sometimes as long as 4 months or so. So
Yeah.
it
So
is it is a little different than sort of an event lighting
right,
element would be,
because if
that where it's
you if
coming in for a night or a weekend.
right, you come in for a night, you don't care that your cable's sagging everywhere and covering the grass and all that. You still need to think about maybe weatherproofing, depending, but for the most part, yeah, you don't need to have those considerations, but because you're there for so long, you do need to
Mm.
think about the environmental impact that you have on everything.
I will say, in looking at, as I'm sure Ron can opine on, I feel like of the theatrical lighting manufacturers, um, within the last 5 years, almost all of them have dove into IP rated
Yeah.
Mm,
fixtures, like, majorly. There were very few theatrical or entertainment fixtures that could go outside at all, a few years ago, and now they're all over the place.
Yeah.
So I think that does bring the two worlds of sort of dynamic architectural lighting and inherently dynamic entertainment lighting a little closer together, and it's going to be interesting to see how that works going forwards. I have seen some projects where people have spec'd some of those entertainment fixtures for permanent installs.
mhm.
And some of them probably can handle it,
Mm.
and many of them probably can't. Some of them have buttons and knobs on the outside, or the ability for somebody to come and, just unplug the connector, and steal it, perhaps.
Right,
So, just because it's waterproof doesn't necessarily mean that it's install grade. Um,
Right.
so that, I think, is something we're going to see more confluence of the two worlds,
mhm.
and also more sort of reckoning with what to do with. Well, what is the difference between IP65 and IP66, and
Yep.
things that people didn't really think about as much a few years back.
And I think we are starting to see, to your point, Chris, we're seeing a lot more manufacturers that are really diving into it, like you said, but they're being much more clear these days about this is an IP65 rated fixture and it's intended to be outside for 2 months, 3 months, a season, whatever. And then it needs to come in and it can't stay out there permanently. Right. So we are seeing a lot more manufacturers lean into that, because I think there probably were some people who used some fixtures and applications they shouldn't have, and there were some failure issues. And so we are seeing that. But we're also seeing a lot of manufacturers getting away from interior listed products. They had too many
Mhm.
SKUs, too many parts, too many. If they're going to offer the same version, why not just offer the IP version and be done with it?
Mhm.
Having fixtures, IP rated fixtures, they've gotten lighter. IP rated fixtures used to be so heavy, and they've figured that out, and the fixtures are much lighter now. So there's very often minimal weight difference between an interior rated fixture and an exterior rated fixture. So we're seeing that they're just like, we're just going to offer one and make our lives easier, and you use it inside, you use it outside, we don't care, and everybody's happy. But they're IP65, not 66, and that is an important distinction for people.
And I think a lot of them, uh, there's huge difference in output as well,
Yeah.
between the sort of IP65 entertainment fixtures getting into the outdoor world versus architectural fixtures. And I think a lot of that has to do with the thermal management of the fixtures themselves,
Mhm.
because a fixture that's designed to be out for a day, a week, a month, 3 months, however long, they have fans a lot of times.
Hmm.
It's still built in there.
Mhm.
I still don't think I would prefer to put a fan on anything that I'm speccing for permanent installation. But when you lose the fan, you lose a good deal of the thermal management and the output of that fixture,
Right.
the efficacy is going to be less.
Well,
You can do a
because a
lot
lot of
less with
these
it.
fixtures have fail safes where if the thermal temperature reaches a certain threshold, it'll actually ramp down how much power it's allowing to be used. And so what you're alluding to is that where if the fan dies, your output goes way down on the fixture. And so, but yeah,
If it does, but in general,
right.
if you're designing a light fixture, if you're designing an LED luminaire, a significant portion of what you're thinking about is thermal management, because you could drive those LEDs with as much power as you want to, and they're either gonna melt real fast or not, and that
Right.
is very much dependent on on the thermal management. So
Right.
if it's the heat sink, that gets you a certain amount. If it's a fan, that gets you a lot more, and now you're able to drive that fixture much harder because you can keep it cool. So
I
that's been
don't
an
know if we've
interesting
had
thing to compare.
liquid cooled LEDs in our industry yet.
I
Have
think
you
they're
seen
using
that?
them in horticulture
Oh,
lighting,
you're right. Yes, because of how
but
much
I
water
haven't
they're
seen them
dealing
elsewhere.
with. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they've already got plumbing in the greenhouse, so why
You're
not hook the lights up to it?
right. But yeah, so I mean, it's a good point because that's something people don't think about because they think, oh, it's LED, it doesn't generate a lot of heat, and it's like it doesn't
Right.
generate a lot of heat in the way that you think it does, but it generates a lot of heat in a different way because basically, like the majority of conventional lighting, it generates heat because that is the source of light. The reason why you have a lot of heat being generated in an LED is more about how the solid state functions and the dissipation of energy because of running through a phosphor and all that fun stuff. So ultimately, it generates heat in a different direction than the light.
Hmm.
Whereas other conventional sources generate heat in the direction of light. And so people think, oh, it's a nice, cool LED. And it's like, yeah, touch the back of the fixture first and then tell me it's cool.
Yeah, and
But
touch the
yeah, so I
back of a
mean,
fixture that has a heat sink versus a fixture that
right.
is just a
Yeah.
strip on a piece of sheet metal,
Yes.
and you'll feel a difference.
Well, and that's the thing. Like with tape lights, you're using the extrusion as the heat sink. And that's why you need to have it in an extrusion. Whereas, the vast majority of out of the box light fixtures already have that designed. But let's say, for instance, you put the fixture out in like 110-degree weather on a regular basis. It needs to be rated for that because otherwise the heat sink's not going to be able to do much for you.
Hmm.
And so thinking through that, like with these entertainment fixtures, yeah, we're seeing sort of this genesis of outdoor application. But through that, there is sort of a little bit of beta testing going on too. And so I think ultimately we are going to see, like Ron's alluding to, some buttoning up of those specs.
Hmm.
But also from the exterior side of things, when we're talking about controls, there's a whole different game that we play when we're designing a lighting control system for an outdoor location than an indoor location. Like if, for instance, we don't have a mounting location that's temperature and humidity controlled, what do you do?
Well, sometimes you create one. I
Yes.
don't. I think the majority of lighting control hardware is not very few of those items are designed to go outdoors, if any.
Yep.
Yes.
And they will often not have the same sort of temperature ratings that even some of the luminaires will. So
Yep.
there's lots of boxes involved. To be fair, I think there should be lots of boxes involved on most indoor applications too,
Sure.
as I've seen plenty of control systems where somebody's just like, deck screwed a piece of DIN rail to the wall and like stuck some stuff on it, and
Yes,
within a
that
month or
happens.
two,
I
it's
swear
going to
I've
be
never
covered in
done that.
dust and kitchen grease.
Oh, of course not.
But-
No.
or wherever it is. But-
just to give people who aren't familiar with what DIN rail is, though, because maybe some people haven't opened up a lighting control panel before. A DIN rail is basically just like a strip of steel that goes inside of a panel, and it's like a standardized mounting feature, so you can clip your devices onto it. Well, this DIN rail doesn't have to live inside of a box. It can just be screwed right onto the wall, and you can mount your DIN rail devices right onto it. I'm not giving this as advice. This is not advice for installation. Do not sue me if this goes poorly in your part. But that happens. It happens way too often. And as a result, it looks really bad. I mean, granted, okay, fine. You don't have the money for a DIN box, and you just need to quickly do something, get it on the project. But as a result, you have wires just spaghettiing out of this device.
I think a lot of control manufacturers, they make great devices, they make great hardware. Sometimes they'll even sell you a box to put it in. Sometimes they won't. And I had found a real... there's really a great opening in the market, and there's a few companies that are now working to fill this hole, which may or may not be a good thing for the independent integrators out there who like to customize boxes on every job. But the lighting designers don't really care. They, by and large, are going to want to say, okay, we need a box that controls the lights. So in that box might be a lighting controller, it might be an Ethernet switch, it might be a DMX gateway, it might be another gateway to connect with something else, to connect with the cloud perhaps, perhaps some opto splitters to distribute the DMX, perhaps some I/O gadgets to convert 0 to 10 or analog inputs or any number of things and attach everything. But ultimately, what's in that box doesn't really matter to the designer as long as it does all the things that they need it to do. And so I suspect that they don't want to spend their time scrolling through what essentially are component lists on the websites of controls manufacturers and figuring out what all these little bits are that they can put in. And then also, oh crap, what are the other bits that I can't get off of this manufacturer's catalog that I now have to source from Cisco or somebody not even in the lighting industry that I need some components from. So I think simplification is a real possibility and a real direction that maybe we're going to see. I think we already are seeing it to some extent. In terms of the ease of specification for lighting controls, which also then leads to an ease of installation. When you say to your contractor, you got to stick this box on the wall and you got to get power to it, and they're like, okay, I can do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not right. I mean, that's one of those things we run into all the time is who, like you said, who's providing all of these parts and pieces. So if manufacturer A is providing this and manufacturer B is providing this, well, who's providing the other things to make those things communicate with each other? And that's where having that third party integrator when these situations come up really comes into play. But you're right. There are companies who are taking advantage of this sort of market area and pre-building these boxes for people in listed shops. So now you're not just buying individually listed components and sticking them in a box. You're buying a listed enclosure by a manufacturer who's taking care of all of that for you. And Webster, am I crazy? Is that Bill Ellis's company?
That's Bill Ellis, yeah. So Candela is one of those UL shops that can do that. But to your point, yeah, like we are seeing that becoming more popular, especially with integrators, because then they can just provide the prefab box to the site.
Yes.
Yeah, I think unless the integrator themselves really wants to get into the box building,
Yep.
business, then this is largely good for everyone. um,
Mhm.
And
but of
I
course, it
think
changes
it'll
the market
really,
dynamic yet again.
well, that's just it. And I think that's where we're going to see the shift, because I think most integrators don't mind building the boxes. I have no problem buying the hardware, putting it in the boxes, designing the system, assuming we're designing the system, right, the way we want it to be. I don't mind putting the components in the boxes if someone else designed it. But
Mhm.
I think we are going to get to a shift where someone, whether it's the electrical engineer, the inspector, is going to require that entire box to be listed. And that is
Hmm.
not something that's going to happen if you're just taking individual components and sticking them in a box in the field. It's going to have zero listing as a completed
Mhm.
enclosure. And that's where I think these shops are really there's potential. It may not change. I could be crazy, but I do certainly see that potential.
Yes. And I think as we're now moving in a direction more towards, um, I would say this is more interior than exterior, but we're seeing a lot of low voltage fixtures again, which is kind of funny because I feel like
Hmm.
that's how the LED
Mhm.
world started, with like low voltage fixtures, and then all of a sudden integral drivers were the best thing ever, and probably still are in most cases. But I think you're seeing now quite a lot of remote driver, um,
Hmm.
style fixtures,
Mhm.
whether it's tape light or even just smaller spotlights that you're
Yep.
able to get a size by not trying to cram a driver in there.
Yep.
I think there's some people who are seeing potential maintenance or environmental benefits from splitting them out. Say, well, if the driver fails, I can throw out the driver and get a new one. I don't have to throw out the light fixture. Um,
Hmm.
and to that end, though, that's a lot more boxes because now you got to have somewhere to put all these drivers. So
Yep.
I think my market forecast for the box business is strong.
The box business. I mean, the other thing though, and we are almost out of time, so I want to kind of recap what we talked about. But maybe food for thought for another episode on the horizon is DC power, because that
Mm.
seems to also be a potential direction that we can go, and where the buildings don't have line voltage anymore, they just have DC power buses running around, and that way you don't need transformers, you don't need drivers, you just tap right in. You don't, all these boxes go away and get replaced by buses and plugs. But that's not to say that it's a perfect solution, and everybody should just go out and start doing DC power for their buildings. It is a potential on the horizon. So I mean, I think
Yeah.
there's sort of two frames of mind: more boxes or DC power, and I don't know which one's going to win in the end. But anyways, this was such a cool conversation, and I feel like we touched on so many different aspects. It's almost like a greatest hits of the podcast in a way, because I mean you've done so many different jobs, and it's great to hear that perspective, because I feel like there is a lot of people there are a lot of people in this industry who either just pick one track and stick with it for the rest of their
Mm.
career, or they might switch jobs once or twice. But I mean, you and I are very similar in the regards where it's like I'm chasing after the work, I'm not chasing after the job. And so you've jumped around, but I mean, like you alluded to at the beginning, you started in the theatrical world, which seems to be, the vast majority of people who are controls nerds anyways in the United States did start in theater. And so I think there's something there to keep in mind for people, especially if they're looking for interns or new recruits, is to look
Mm.
at the theatrical programs at schools, universities, and see who's got the technical aspects to want to get involved in this. Because in theater, there's just something about how theater is done that when you walk out of that experience, and you've done it for enough years, you know enough to be able to then carry it to this industry, and help this industry get elevated to a higher standard of controls. But then also, when it comes to sales, it's not a bad starting point. You get that
Mm.
exposure, you get that knowledge, you get that experience. And it's, a lot of people do say, oh, sales, I don't like sales, or I don't want to go over to the dark side. But in reality, it has to happen. We need the salespeople. You cannot function in this industry without sales. Similar to in the theatrical
Mhm.
world, you can't function without rental houses.
And you're
You
never done. So when I
yeah,
finally stopped doing sales after 10 or 12 years of sales, and now I'm working for a lighting design firm, guess how much of my time I still spend writing proposals and putting
hmm
together budgets for projects,
right.
and all of these very sales adjacent, we like to call it marketing or business development in the
Sure,
design
but
world,
in
but it's
reality, you're
still pretty
selling
much sales.
services.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. This economy, you have to sell. You
Yep.
cannot get away. Yeah, yeah, okay, fine. Your job might not be salesperson, but you are constantly selling something because somebody has to buy something for you to make money. And so as a result, the services that you're offering are still very much a product, a resource that needs to be purchased, and there needs to be demand for it. So having your career start in sales is actually a fantastic way to start off. And there's plenty of sales jobs out there. If you go to like Inside Lighting or other places, they have job boards, and you just go through and it's like sales, 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 sales. So take advantage of that. I mean, at the same time,
Absolutely.
there's always avenues to leap off of that and get involved in other ways. And so
Mm.
looking at it from a manufacturer's standpoint, having that experience of inside sales gives you that exposure to the industry and knowledge. And then you can dive deeper as a manufacturer, as part of that team, helping design and implement lighting controls and lighting in this industry. And then honestly, jumping out of that and becoming a designer gives you so much of a background to be able to do the job well because you've seen it from the other side. And as a result, that gives you that much better capability to help projects going forward. And so it's not surprising that you are involved in some of these very niche, very skill heavy roles, because you're not just doing the bread and butter occupancy sensors, keypads in every space kind of applications. You're in these bespoke theatrical experiences, and that's not something you can just start doing without any experience or knowledge. You have to have that experience and knowledge to support you in that. And so as a result, there are few people like you, Chris, in this industry, but it's
Oh,
a great
shucks.
example for it's a great example for people to kind of follow and not hold themselves back and go, oh, I don't want to do that job. It's like, well, what do you want to do work wise? Like, what are you building towards? And so as a result, I think that it's really great to have you on this show, and we should definitely have you back on to talk more about the work that you do, because I think there are some fantastic projects that you've done that are worth talking about.
Mm.
But regardless, I don't know if I captured everything, but as far as our conversation goes, there's so much depth to what we talked about.
It's a good wrap, and I think for me, I'm not really an expert in any of these things. I don't,
Sure.
I know you've a lot of the folks who come on and have these amazing wealths of knowledge. So I was quite intimidated because I don't really have that, but I know like enough about enough things to be
hmm
dangerous, as the saying goes, and for me that's very liberating, because when you know what you don't know and you know
Hmm.
what you do know, uh,
hmm
and you also realize kind of the work that you want to do, that you find impactful for yourself, and the types of people that you want to do it with, um, you can always figure out the things that you don't know, or better yet,
hmm
find people to work with who are smarter than you in those areas. And that's maybe one of the best things to come out of theater, for example,
hmm
is this sense of collaboration,
Yep.
and multidisciplinary teams, even within uh, a department like lighting, for example. You wind up with multiple people with multiple skill sets,
Hmm.
and if your goals are aligned, then it's a lot of fun, and it's good work.
Yeah, awesome, Chris. Thank you so much. That's fantastic. And you're right. Sales is not the dark side. Everyone always says that, and the inside sales guys are not the used car salesman. So that stigma of the whole used car salesman, like the inside sales guys, that's not them. But it
The
is. It's
outside
such a
folks aren't
great.
either.
Well, not all of them. Like, look, I get labeled as the used car salesman from time to time too. It happens to all of us. Like,
Right.
when
Yeah.
you're forward facing and you're outside sales, and no matter what job you're in, like you said, at some point you're working on proposals. You're still selling yourself, or you're selling your company, or whatever you're selling, your service. You are still selling. So at every point in time, every one of us is in sales. There's really no way to avoid it. Even my installers, when they're on site, if the client asks them for something else, there's always an opportunity for a second touch. So everyone, regardless of what they say, except maybe the engineers, everybody is in sales in some way, shape, and form if they're forward facing. And it really does help down the road, because so many projects today are budget driven. And when you have just even the basic idea of what fixtures cost and control systems and this and that, it really helps you to, as a designer, work on those systems when you get a budget up front from your client. And it's not just, let me design the moon and then tell you can't afford it. Let me really design something that's going to work for you around your budget. Let's maximize what we can do with the money we have versus the other way around. And that's where having some sort of a sales background really will help a lot. So yeah, a lot of fun. Thank you very much, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I will close us out and remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. Got all of our episodes, merch store, and information about the NAILD LSC. If you are unfamiliar with this, you should check it out, because it's hopefully we're going to help change the industry and get more professionals doing lighting controls. But also, huge shout out to our sponsor for this episode. We could not do this without MW Connect. Check them out, mwconnect.us. They've been around for 40 plus years now. Again, you might know them as McWong. They're now MW Connect, but they do get involved in a lot of these kinds of integration type projects, helping out unique conditions and so it's definitely worth checking them out if you're unfamiliar with them, or if you are familiar with them, consider them for your next project. But anyways, thank you for joining us. And Chris, thank you. This was an awesome conversation.